Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you joining us here on this February 24th. It is, for the record, 9:03 a.m. I hope everybody survived our little cold snap without too much harm and damage and headache, because I think a lot of us had a lot of headaches from that storm, if no real harm. But that being said, at least we are warming up quickly. And in the interest of freeing everybody's day up, why don't I get this show on the road? Called the meeting to order at 9:03. Item number 2, confirmation of receipt of posted notices. I got the last of those this morning that I needed, so we are properly noticed for this meeting. Next agenda item, welcome and introductions. I will start. John Martin, General Manager of the Southeast Texas Groundwater Conservation District, comprised of Jasper, Newton, Hardin, and Tyler counties. How about you, Ms. Ritter?
Hi, Samantha Ryder with Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District, covering Montgomery County.
Zach Holland, representing Bluebonnet Groundwater Conservation District and serving Austin, Grimes, Waller, and Walker counties.
Mr. Ashmore.
Good morning, y'all. I'm Gary, and I take care of Polk County and San Jacinto County as best I can.
Ms. Hopkins.
Beverly Hopkins, Brazoria County Groundwater Conservation District.
Pudge, how are you today? Nope. Can you hear us, Pudge? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. French.
Larry French with the Texas Water Development Board.
And we have Mr. Oliver out there hiding too somewhere, right? I don't see his picture up right now, but.
I'm here. I'm Wade Oliver at Intera.
Okay. Introductions done. Unless I missed anybody, I don't think I did. Moving along.
Hey, John.
The two subsidence districts.
Oh, the who? Mr. Thompson, I apologize.
Robert Thompson with the Fort Bend Subsidence District.
And Mr. Turco.
Mike Turco with the Harris Galveston Subsidence District.
I'll be one of those mornings, huh? Okay, now moving along to the next agenda item, we have public comments, and I believe I've only gotten 2 who have signed up in advance. Let me get to my Dropbox folder real quick. I have Mr. Yours. Are you available? Are you out there?
Mr. Yours should be unmuted.
Can you hear us, Mr. Yours?
How's that? How's that?
We can hear you now. You're good to go.
I found the right button. My name is John Yours. I'm a resident of the Woodlands. Following the recent Lone Star board meeting, I remain confused on what position they're taking on the approval of a DFC candidate from the 3 options that are being discussed. One director indicated that there was no hurry in this process. I certainly agree that Lone Star does not have a need to create a DFC that has a MAG increase from approximately 60,000 acre feet to over 100,000 acre feet. This increased amount can easily be considered in the next round of DFCs in 2028. Another director commented on a slide presentation that a majority of the slides mentioned the word subsidence. I think to all it is clear that the large amount of groundwater that Lone Star wants to pump, there is a serious subsidence problems for southeast Montgomery County. This is apparent even using incorrect Jasper Aquifer compaction data in the subsidence calculation. All we ask is that Lone Star present a reasonable groundwater management plan that provides adequate water for a growing population, uses validated compaction factors in the subsidence calculations, protects vulnerable locations in southeast Montgomery County from excessive subsidence, and integrates surface water into the plan. They are not ready to do that. I ask that the DFC option, if it must be considered, be the one with the lowest MAG and the lowest subsidence be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yours. Next up, Mr. Lilac.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can. The floor is yours.
My name is Robert Lilac. I'm president of the Woodlands Mud Number 1. Many of the undersigned and others have previously addressed the GMA 14 board, the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District board, and the Texas Water Development Board about Lone Star's desire to change its desired future conditions to allow increased groundwater pumpage. Reams of technical data, modeling outputs, and dozens of hours of testimony by experts on both sides have been presented on the impacts or lack thereof related to subsidence and aquifer levels, which affect resources available to other groundwater users and impact many homes and businesses. Lone Star's board of directors, all of who were elected with the financial support of Quadvest, argue that future DFCs need to consider 9 factors as presented at their February 9, 2021 board meeting. All statements and PowerPoint clips at board meetings and at GMA 14, however, continue to gloss over 5 basic, undisputable facts. Pumping groundwater that lowers existing aquifer levels unquestionably causes subsidence in varying and difficult or impossible ways to predict or model. Subsidence is irreversible. Subsidence increases the susceptibility of many homes and businesses to flooding and effects from changes in fault lines. Depleting aquifer levels increases the cost to further utilize groundwater. There is plenty of surface water available, supplemented with limited groundwater to meet everyone's needs. The position of the undersigned was eloquently stated in the November 5, 2018 article published in the Houston Chronicle entitled "How Montgomery County Could Keep Sinking." When ground subsides, when ground subsides, it sinks. In this region, the primary cause is groundwater removal. Using surface water instead of groundwater reduces subsidence. Where groundwater use has been reduced, subsidence has generally ceased, said Michael Turco, the general manager of the Harris-Galveston Subsidence District. Yet some Montgomery County voters advocate removing more groundwater because at this moment it's cheaper than surface water. They are betting their future and their neighbors' futures on it. The February 5, 2021 report, Review and Recommendations on Subsidence Investigations, Phase 1, prepared by the prestigious Groundwater Science Advisory Committee, managed by the Houston Advanced Research Center, and sponsored by 4 local government agencies, conclusively states, among other important non-biased conclusions. In Southeast Texas, groundwater use and management are inextricably linked with regional subsidence. The Gulf Coast Aquifer System consists of several aquifers, including the Chicot and Evangeline and Jasper aquifers. Removal of groundwater from these aquifers can lead to soil compaction and subsidence. Consequences of subsidence in the greater Houston-Galveston region include a reduced capacity for aquifer storage, submerged lands, increased frequency and severity of flooding, collapsed water wall casings, disruption of irrigation ditches, damage to foundations of commercial and residential real estate, and damage to public infrastructure such as roads and bridges. When Montgomery County converted to include water supplies other than groundwater beginning in 2015, the water levels for wells located in Conroe and the Woodlands have generally risen after yearly declines between the time monitoring began through 2015. Correspondingly, subsidence rates have attenuated in these areas during the same period. The primary motive of Lone Star's goal to change DFCs is to allow more lower cost pumping of groundwater by private large volume users, especially Quadvest, to increase investor and owner profits. Quadvest and perhaps other private LVUs promote never-ending studies which tend to whitewash, bully, hector, and wear down public interests that do not support Lone Star's interests.
Mr. Lilac, can I interrupt for a moment? You're over our 5-minute time limit by a minute or so. Can you paraphrase your last couple of paragraphs for us real
I
quick?
have 2 paragraphs to go. These same techniques also appear to be used to curry regulatory approval. The debate and arguments have gone on long enough. The facts are in. It is time to put an end to the controversy pitting private interests against public interests. We simply cannot further deplete aquifer levels without potential of increased harm and expense to innocent bystanders. I have personally witnessed the flooding of homes in Grogan's Point alone that is directly attributable to less than 1 foot of subsidence. One more paragraph. The solution to setting DFCs is plain and simple. Total groundwater pumping limits that cause no further depletion of aquifer levels. The real debate is setting a fair allocation of limited withdrawals among all well owners. We're all in the same boat and need to row in the same direction if we want to reach the desired destinations. And on my statement, I have a list of 20 people who have read and subscribed to it. And so I submit that as my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I don't have anybody else signed up. I did receive a couple of other documents. One from the Woodlands Township that have been entered into the record. The report from the executive summary prepared by the Groundwater Science Committee and the subsidence investigation prepared and the full the summary and the full report from the Groundwater Science Advisory Committee have been entered into the record for our members. Other than that, I believe Mr. Turkey said you got a question from somebody.
Yes, thank you. We had a question come in through the webinar, and I just wanted to read that question. This is from Councilman Duke Kuhn in the city of Conroe, and asked, please describe the amount of subsidence found in central and northern Montgomery County. Very quickly, the information on current subsidence rates is available on the Harris-Galveston Subsidence website. Homepage, go to hdsubsidence.org. You see all of the subsidence monitoring network throughout the region. That network is operated in cooperation with the Fort Bend Subsidence District, the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District, Brazoria County Groundwater Conservation District, and the University of Houston. There are a few sites on the northern side of Montgomery County, not as many as there are on the southern side of Montgomery County. And certainly, if you have any questions about that or need any assistance in getting that information, just reach out to the Subsidence District. We'd be happy to point you in the right direction and give you some more information on that. That's all that I've received.
Okay. I guess at this point, if there's anybody else who would like to make public comment, they can raise their hand. I'm not sure how to use it, but I'm sure they can signal and make public comment. Is there a let's see, how do people raise their hand in this using GoToWebinar?
They have the ability to ask to signify to the organizers that they have a question.
Okay. Has anybody signified they have a question or comments? It's comments we're looking for, really.
Comments, yeah.
I do see that there is a question from Stacy Reese. She is asking about a non-STARS consultant, if they have anything to add to the question about subsidence in Montgomery County. Otherwise, I do not see any hands raised. That's the only question I see.
I don't think it's the appropriate place to tackle that. We can do it later down in the general discussion item. I think it'd be better. Item number 8. So if we have no other comments, public comments to be made, we move along to item number 5, discussion and possible action to approve minutes of the January 20, 2021 GMA 14 joint planning meeting. Mr. Holland has been very busy with things other than work as of the last month or two. He's got his hands full with some issues. So the minutes are not available right now. We will get those taken care of at our next meeting. Unfortunately for Zach, that means you now have 2 sets of minutes to get caught up on. So if you need a hand with anything, give me a shout. We'll get you some help. Otherwise, moving along to item number 6, update from the Texas Water Development Board and discussion of any related items of interest to GMA 14. Mr. French.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I do have a couple of things to update you on that happened pretty much in the last 4 weeks or so. Our board met in January and adopted rules for the brackish groundwater production zones. So that may be of interest to several of the districts attending here. You can find those on our agency website, those rules. We've also just published the statewide survey of the suitability for aquifer storage and recovery projects or aquifer recharge projects. There is a report and a web-based map that you can explore the data on. Again, on our website, you can find it there. That's going to be a very useful tool for those interested in aquifer storage and recovery programs going forward. Again, that was a statewide study. And then finally, in conjunction with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, there's been a report published on the priority groundwater management areas and groundwater conservation districts. It's a report that's prepared and issued every 2 years for the state the legislature, and you can find that at the TCEQ's website. That's available there. If you have trouble finding it, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to share you the direct link to that. So that's pretty much sums up with the latest information on groundwater projects from the board. Thanks, John.
Not a problem. Anybody have any questions for Larry on any of those items? Hearing none, why don't we jump along to the convening the meeting as a meeting of the GMA 14 Joint Planning Interlocal Agreement participants. And item number 7, which is review and discuss all previously considered elements of Chapter 36-108 D 1 through 9 as they relate to the current DFC cycle and and GAMs being considered as potentially proposed DFCs. Mr. Oliver, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. It's good to see all of you. I am going to share my screen here and do a technology check. Is everyone seeing my presentation?
Yes.
All right. So, all right. Turned off my video here since I've only got the single screen, but so John, my plan today, just as you said in the agenda item, is to run through a review of the factors for that we have been going over for the last 2 years related to development and consideration of desired future conditions. There's a large number of slides that I have here, but my plan is to move through it pretty speedily. But my request for all of the interlocal agreement participants here is that you interject if you have any questions as we're moving along, because we're covering about 2 years worth of work in a brief presentation. But I want to make sure that if there's any key items here that we get them addressed in your mind, because there's consideration and potential proposal for adoption of DFCs on the agenda today.
Sounds good.
All right. So these are the 9 factors that we heard about these in the public comments this morning. We've been talking about these for the last 2 years. These are the factors required in Chapter 36 of the Water Code. We have aquifer uses and conditions, water supply needs and management strategies, hydrological conditions. That's the one that includes total estimated recoverable storage and water budget items. Other environmental impacts, impacts on subsidence, socioeconomic impacts, impacts on private property rights, the feasibility of achieving the DFC, and any other relevant information. And this group identified potential impacts on faulting as relevant other information. So we reviewed that. This is the schedule that we have followed over the course of the last 2+ years. So reviewing each of the factors and then looking at modeling impacts and then reviewing the remaining factors. And there's a structure to this, or a method behind the madness, so to speak, where we reviewed the baseline groundwater management information up front. So this is information that is independent of the desired future conditions under consideration. And then we looked at the modeling scenarios, and I believe we were one of the first groups to do a more quantitative assessment of the balancing test. And so we looked at those scenarios, one kind of tied to almost no impact and one tied to very significant impacts on available drawdown to wells, 50% remaining. And then we looked at a number of different model run scenarios. I counted them this morning. I think other than the balancing test spanning runs that we did, we looked at 17 other scenarios there. Of that group, this group identified 3 scenarios that were developed through that process for as potential desired future conditions for reviewing the remaining factors. And the reason that it's structured that way is because the remaining factors they depend on the model results and the specifics of the DFC scenarios for how they are impacted. I mentioned the balancing test. This is the wording within the water code that as this group is developing desired future conditions, that the adopted DFCs must provide a balance between the highest practicable level of groundwater production, so that's one side, and the conservation, preservation, protection, recharging, and prevention of waste of groundwater and control of subsidence in the management area. So it's putting layman's terms here, it's saying there are 2 good things on both sides of this spectrum, and it's this group's responsibility to try and balance these competing interests. Each of the factors that I laid out weighs on one side of the balancing test, and in some cases both, whether environmental impacts are lessened as you produce less water and you're more on the conservation end. And then there's socioeconomic impacts that can be on either side. Same with private property rights and impacts as well. I mentioned the model scenarios and this particular DFC language development. So back at the April meeting, we looked at the DFC language consistent with the approach using multiple metrics, and also consistent with each of the scenarios that were proposed for consideration of those remaining factors. And this is that language. So it's in each county in GMA 14, no less than, and then the scenarios go between 70 and 80% median available drawdown remaining, and no more than 1 foot of average additional subsidence between 2009 and 2080. This is not a third factor, but it's a modeling decision here that to allow for growth while ensuring the distribution of groundwater availability remains realistic. The pumping that we added to the model did not exceed 30,000 acre feet per year above the maximum projected water demand in the state water plan. So that's to address some of the issues that we found way early on, where there was no projected need for groundwater, and some of the modeling come up with 200,000 acre feet per year in a county above what was projected, and the effect that has is that it reduces groundwater availability elsewhere. So that's why we have structured it this way. Two of the scenarios have DFCs articulated the same way, the 70% and the 1 foot of average additional subsidence, but they use a different base well file. I want to stress that, at least from my perspective, and I think Larry would agree with me, but he can step in if he disagrees. They have the same DFC language, the 70% 1 foot with the 2016 base file, and this 70% 1 foot with the RUND base file. The only difference between the two is what we submit to the Water Development Board for to assist them in developing the modeled available groundwater.
Hey, Wade, this is Gary. Can I ask a question?
You may.
The line about the average subsidence, the dates, how did the dates get picked? 2009 to 2080, what are those based on? I don't recall.
Great question, Gary. So 2009 is the last year of the calibrated portion of the Houston area groundwater model. So that's the historical window over which we have that information. That model came out in 2012, I believe, but the last year that they had data to feed that modeling process was 2009. 2080 is farther out into the future than the last round of DFCs, but that's to line up with the regional water planning process that these model available groundwater estimates are going to feed into. So the next process that occurs for regional water planning is going to go out to 2080, and these is what comes out of this joint planning process will feed into that.
Is there any risk of, since this is the year 2021 and we're going back to 2009, that something we could already be exceeding that 1 foot average additional?
I mean, I don't think that the information that we have shows that we are going to exceed that 1 foot of additional subsidence over that relatively small window. And I think that, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the Houston area groundwater model is being updated right now. So there's going to be a new, more recent base year the next time that we're looking at this.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So to put this in layman's terms, this DFC language in the box up at the top, I have used the phrase multi-metric approach before, but I'm not going to lean heavily on the phrasing. This is essentially the goal in each county is to stay below both of these bars. That's as simply as I can state it. The potential benefit of this, as we talked about way back in April and at the subsequent meetings, was that the DFCs are consistent throughout the GMA while still accounting for the local differences in conditions. That's one. Both the process for developing DFCs, so this whole exercise that we've been going through, and the results, which is the DFC language, directly address the two statutory factors there. And it has a less direct link to the existing pumping distribution. So early on in this process, there was public comments submitted and discussion at the GMA level about how the existing distribution of pumping should or should not be considered during development of desired future conditions. This has a much less direct link to that existing pumping distribution because we set the goals first and then figured out the pumping consistent with those goals. The potential drawbacks is that there's more than one thing to monitor, although there's significant monitoring of water levels and subsidence throughout the area already, and then using two metrics is a newish concept.
Hey, Wade, real fast on the newish concept, and I know you've said this before, I just can't recall, but is there anyone else that does the multiple metric, any other GMAs?
During the last round of DFCs, Bluebonnet within GMA 14 had both water level based DFCs and subsidence based DFCs. Many GMAs, I'm thinking about GMA 8 during the last round and during this current round of DFCs, they developed metrics at different scales. So they used the same metric, but they applied it at an average at the county, GCD, and GMA scales. So that's overlapping DFCs, so to speak. So giving themselves two things that they have to meet, or three things in that case, instead of one. But I think something that's more unique in this scenario is that every county has the same goals as opposed to the use of multiple goals.
Hey, Wade, aren't there some of the either South or kind of West Texas groups that also include not only a drawdown, but also spring flow as a metric?
Certainly spring flow is used as a metric. I know GMA 10 uses one. I believe GMA 13 uses one. I don't recall offhand whether they are overlapping or not. You may be right. I just, for mental health sake, don't commit all DFCs in the state to memory. So yeah, I don't have a clean answer for you on that, Zach, but that very well may be true. Any other questions on this before I move on? Okay, so running through each of the factors with speed, the first factor is aquifer uses and conditions. So we looked at the major aquifers in the GMA, which is by and large the Gulf Coast aquifer, although we have a little bit of the Carrizo-Wilcox creeping into Grimes and Waller counties. We looked at the minor aquifers as well. Both the Carrizo-Wilcox and then the slivers of these minor aquifers were considered not relevant for joint planning purposes during the last round, and the resolution that was developed for today's meeting assumes or has that same declaration. For the GMA as a whole and for each of the counties within the GMA, we developed maps of well depths showing where the shallower and deeper wells are located, and we have a histogram here on the top right showing the frequency of each of those wells, both within the GMA and for every county. And we did a very similar thing for well yields, where you can see a histogram of the frequency of different well yields and where they're located spatially, both GMA as a whole and by county. And so some of these bluer colors are the higher yield wells. You can see that sometimes or oftentimes they're located more spaced out from lower yield wells as well. We also looked at annual pumping by aquifer. And so this is pumping between 2000 and 2016. by Aquifer using data from the Texas Water Development Board. You'll note a big change beginning in 2010 where there's an other aquifer that becomes very dominant, or at least a large supplemental source of groundwater. That is not due to a shift from the Gulf Coast aquifer to other units. That's an accounting change where instead of submitting paper forms to the Water Development Board, things are submitted online. And this is consistent throughout the state, actually, where folks are not familiar with, or folks may be familiar with the subunit of an aquifer that they're using, such as Jasper or Evangeline, and not realize that it's part of the Gulf Coast aquifer. And so they'll submit, they don't see Jasper or Evangeline in the submittal, and so they submit it as other. And so by and large, over this entire period, regardless of what the other aquifer designation shows on this chart, the Gulf Coast is the major source of groundwater in GMA 14. And we also looked at it by use type. This is groundwater use by use type, and municipal is by far the dominant user or source of groundwater, and then manufacturing and irrigation are the other more significant types of users of groundwater.
Hey, Wade.
Yes.
The last section we just went through aligns with the current draft piece of the explanatory report that you've been working on and we've kind of been reviewing, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So if you think of everything that we're going through today, it's basically a brief run through of all of the contents of that go into the explanatory report.
Gotcha. So these graphs will be included in the explanatory report?
And all of the supplemental charts, so everything that you've seen here, we presented to the GMA at the county level as well. I'm not going to, those aren't in the text of the report, but those are included as appendix.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Yep. Moving on to water supply needs and strategies. So this is a consideration of the regional water planning process that feeds into the state water plan. So we looked at water demands, which is the volume of water required to carry out anticipated domestic, public, and economic activities. Existing supplies, so that's the maximum amount of water that's physically and legally accessible, immediate use, okay? And so demands are projected out into the future, out to 2070 or 2080, depending on the plan that you're looking at. And then the difference between those two is defined as the water need. So in the regional water planning process, the way to address a need is through a water management strategy. So we looked at each of these four components: demands, supplies, needs, and strategies. So these show projected water demands over time for 3 different planning cycles. So we've got the total water use from the Texas Water Development Board Water Use Survey here. We have the darker line is the 2012 State Water Plan demand. The middle line that I believe is green is the 2017 State Water Plan demand. So that's the most current state water plan and the one that is required to be considered by this group. But regional, as we were going through this, the regional water planning process feeding into the 2022 State Water Plan, much of that data was already available, so we incorporated the demands feeding into that that are going into the 2022 State Water Plan as well, and how they compare to historical water use. And you can see how that breaks down by county on the top left, and you can see how that breaks down by water use type on the bottom right. And much of that difference between the 2017 and the 2022 state water plans goes to changes in the manufacturing demand, much of that in Jefferson County.
Hey, Wade.
Yes.
Real fast, the 2012 and the 2017, and again, I apologize because this is my first round being involved, and I do attend the Region H meetings, but there's a lot that happens in those. Do you have an explanation as to why that dropped like it did? Or does anyone?
I'll have to go back and look at the at the specifics of that. You know, like I noted just a second ago, a lot of it is in Jefferson County, but I don't have the specifics for why projections change.
That's fine. I can try and reach out to some Region H folks as well, just to check.
Okay.
Just curious.
Well, let me back up. The Region H folks will likely know, but the demand projections are developed at the Water Development Board.
Okay. All right. Larry, I'll be in touch.
Okay, good enough.
We also looked at existing supplies. So we have the bars show existing supplies here and the breakdown between groundwater and surface water. And then the black lines show the demands, and the delta between these two would be the needs here. So you can see how that demand shifts downward between the two planning cycles, and that surface water is the predominant existing supply in GMA 14, but groundwater is also significant. And then we have here the identified strategies and the sources of those strategies. So surface water is the largest source for water management strategies, followed by reuse and demand reduction, with groundwater being one of the smaller source types. Moving on to hydrological conditions, which is factor 3. We looked at the characteristics of the Gulf Coast aquifer, how it's broken down into the Chico, Evangeline, Burkeville, and Jasper units, with some of the Catahoula in there as well. As you move from the northwest to the southeast, the aquifer dips towards the coast, and the hydrological conditions change from being less confined the shallower you are and the farther up dip you are, to more confined the deeper you are and the more closer to the coast that you are. We also looked at geologic cross sections developed from geophysical logs, and we've boxed cross section 6 here, running right through the heart of GMA 14. This is from Young and Others 2016, which was a Water Development Board report that we assisted with. And this shows the different hydrostratigraphic formations within the Gulf Coast. So instead of breaking it down by Chico, Evangeline, Burkeville, Jasper, we're breaking it down by Beaumont, Lissy, Willis, Upper Goliad. So these are just different ways of looking at the same geologic units. But on these charts, we have the interpreted lithology, whether it's a sand, which is something that has a color here, or a clay, which is something that is black, and then the interpreted water quality from those geophysical logs. So the blue indicates fresh and is typically located in the shallower portions, less than 1,000 feet. And then as you move deeper and as you move immediately closer to the coast, you can see that the water quality deteriorates. We also looked at storage properties within the aquifer, and I mentioned the level of confinement. This changes the storage properties from a more specific yield or unconfined condition to a more confined condition where confined storativity dominates. What's important to consider about these, and this may feel like an archaic or a very down in the weeds hydrogeological thing, but the takeaway here is that each foot of drawdown yields much more water when an aquifer is confined than when it's unconfined. So when it's unconfined, you have typically lower yields, and the impacts are pretty isolated near the well. The benefit of the deeper confined storage is that you can get much higher well yields, but those impacts, because not just of the additional water produced, but because of the confined storativity of the aquifer, spread for a much farther distance, so a much larger cone of depression. One of the required elements that we have to walk through for the consideration of hydrological conditions is looking at the total estimated recoverable storage developed by the Texas Water Development Board. So we walked through the development of how TERS, as it's known, is calculated. So for a typical 30 mile by 30 mile county with an average aquifer thickness of about 500 feet, you would assume, or it is assumed, that a specific yield or a drainable porosity might be somewhere between 10 or 15% of that. And so if you multiply it out, that's essentially area times thickness times taking 15% of that whole volume. You get very large numbers, like in this case 43.2 million acre feet. One of the characteristics that make aquifers as productive as they are in this area is the confined pressure that takes the water level above the aquifer top. As I mentioned, the storativity is much lower than specific yield, and it contributes only nominally to the overall volume within the total estimated recoverable calculation. But it's important to remember that this volume here is a lot of what makes the aquifer as useful and economical as it is today. So we looked at each of those volume ranges by county. What the Water Development Board does is take a 25% to 75% range of the total storage to estimate the TERS. My guidance to this group was and still is that interpretation of that 25 to 75%, in my mind, it represents the approximate fraction of the total storage that's in the water-bearing zones. If you remember back to the cross-section I showed, not everywhere within an aquifer is sandy. There's lots of clays throughout. It is in fact the clays that compact and lead to subsidence, and they are found there. So as you're thinking about these ranges, I think about it as the total storage in the sands, not what is recoverable from those zones. And as you're thinking about this, there's lots of limitations that are known about these numbers, and these are listed in the TERS report. But there's no consideration of water quality, water levels dropping below pumps, land surface subsidence, degradation of water quality, changes to surface water groundwater interaction or recharge, or the practicality or economic feasibility of development. One of the other required elements for the hydrological conditions piece is looking at water budgets, and so we developed historical water budgets by county for each unit of the Gulf Coast aquifer. And so all of that information is available to the group. The next factor is consideration of environmental impacts. This is chiefly focused on and this is done across the state as you're thinking about environmental impacts associated with development of groundwater, that breaks down almost everywhere to impacts on groundwater surface water interaction. So that's what we focused on here as well. The Houston area groundwater model groups recharge and interaction between groundwater and surface water into a single mod flow package. So we employed the same process that the Water Development Board uses for supplying information for your management plans to estimate where in GMA 14 and in each of these counties we interpret the model results as being interaction with groundwater and surface water versus interaction with recharge. And so that's what each of these cells shows. And as you might expect, or at least I hope you do, as much as we've been talking about groundwater over the last 2 years, as water levels decline, outflow to surface water decreases. And in areas where there is an inflow from surface water, that increases. One characteristic of the mod flow package that's used for this, known as the general head boundary package, is that it doesn't limit how much water can flow into the aquifer. So the harder you pump on the model, so to speak, the more this limitation of there not being any cap to how much water you can dump into the model becomes an issue. So according to the scenarios that we looked at and the current model, all counties would begin drawing on surface water at some point over this period out to 2080, but that hinges on this known limitation of the model. So I urge you, as you're looking at the GMA level results and the county level results, to use those with caution.
Hey, Wade, is that something that's going to be fixed in the Gulf 2023?
Yes, it is. So the Gulf 2023 model, it's currently under development, but there is, I believe, a strong push to not use the general head boundary at all for interaction for recharge or groundwater surface water interaction. So moving on to the next factor, we looked at subsidence impacts, which is, within Texas, GMA 14 is the area with the most acute subsidence issues, and so it's obviously taken a dominant portion of our discussions. To define some terms here, and we did this before when we looked at it, but subsidence is the lowering or sinking of the land surface, typically in response to removal of subsurface support. As was mentioned earlier in the Houston area, this is primarily from the production of groundwater. And so but the takeaway here is subsidence occurs at the surface. Compaction is a decreaser in the volume or thinning of a geologic formation. So if subsidence occurs at the surface, compaction occurs within a geologic formation, and that happens beneath the surface. So the Chico may compact, or a layer within the Evangeline may compact. The accumulation of all that compaction migrating to land surface is what creates subsidence. And as I mentioned before, subsidence primarily occurs within the clay layers of the aquifer, or the clay units of the aquifer, and that's because of the characteristics of clay grains. They are small, they are relatively flat, and so they are more susceptible to compacting when you remove the water pressure that's holding them open. Sand grains, on the other hand, as you can kind of see by this cartoon, have a much are much less susceptible to compaction because of their size and their shape.
Nice slide. Thank you.
Was that Gary? Thanks.
Yeah, that's Gary. That's a nice slide. Thank you.
We mentioned, or in fact, I showed part of this cross-section on an earlier slide, but focusing on a different feature of this, the subsidence that occurs, the compaction that occurs, that's all influenced by the depth of burial of a particular formation or lens of the aquifer, the total thickness of that clay lens. So that's, that impacts how readily the pressure changes can propagate through those clays. So that ties into the thickness of the individual beds as well, and as well as the sediment age. So how long it's been buried, and this is where you have to start thinking in geologic time, how long it's been buried and been exposed to pressure of overburden of being buried to allow it to compact. All of these things tie into whether additional compaction and subsidence occurs. And subsidence is monitored, most heavily within these subsidence districts, but in many areas throughout GMA 14, and you can see changes in the land surface elevation over time, and you can see correlations with the rate of change in land surface elevation with changes in aquifer conditions. So this is from the GPS site PA13, Southern Montgomery County, and in 2016 there was a conversion away from relying solely on groundwater. So the total amount of groundwater being produced was reduced, water levels recovered, and the rate of subsidence declined substantially. And so there are GPS sites around all showing similar responses, but not not all counties had a quite as dramatic a reduction in groundwater use in the historical period in 2016 that we were monitoring like this. So this is just showing this as an example. But I've provided GPS site data for sites throughout the GMA within the supporting materials. And then going back to the scenarios, we looked at the modeled subsidence, modeled additional subsidence, I should say, associated with each of the three scenarios under consideration. And so I've developed these at the GMA level, which I'm showing here. But again, each of the supporting materials shows detailed contour maps for subsidence and water level changes at the county scale as well. So this is for the 70% 1 foot scenario using the 2016 base. And you can see the areas that have greater and lesser subsidence in this scenario out to 2080. I'll note here that it's largely on the coastal half of GMA 14 where you see the higher rates of subsidence. This is the 80% 1 foot scenario. So you can see the magnitudes are less, particularly on the coastal half of GMA 14. And then the 70% 1 foot scenario using the RUND base well file. So this is a distinct model scenario, but it's associated with the same DFC language. So median available drawdown remaining of 70% and an average subsidence of 1 foot. So as you're monitoring progress towards DFCs, the model scenario used makes, and in my opinion, makes very little difference to the way that you monitor and manage. That's just, that MAG is a number that feeds into the regional water planning process and is a consideration as you're developing or as you're permitting and going about your GCD business. We looked at socioeconomic impacts. Quantitatively, most of the information that we reviewed for socioeconomic impacts goes back to the regional water planning process. They look at the impacts of not meeting water needs during a repeat of the drought of record. And so we have that information for each of the regions, region H, G, and I that intersect with GMA 14. The Water Development Board has a really nifty interface for investigating that data. This is an example for Grimes County showing by decade and by water use category the economic losses and the job losses that would be associated with not meeting a water need during a repeat of the drought of record. While this is quantitative and while this is super useful, it's not the entirety of what the GMA has to consider as it relates to socioeconomic impacts. This process is influenced by the availability of other supply sources, whereas joint planning is focused on groundwater, and it doesn't consider potential negative socioeconomic impacts from groundwater production. So if subsidence were to have a substantial socioeconomic impact, that is not something that feeds into the quantification that goes into the regional water planning process. So if balance is the theme today, one of the ways of thinking about the socioeconomic impacts is that there are impacts on both sides of the spectrum, both from developing groundwater and from not developing groundwater. We looked at private property rights, where this is a required consideration, the impact on the interest and rights in private property, including the ownership and the rights of management area landowners and their lessees and the signs and groundwater as recognized in Chapter 36 of the Water Code. Again, there are private property impacts on each side of the spectrum. So allowing existing users to produce more or a high level of pumping that could pose risks to water supply and future needs, and it increases drainage from neighboring landowners, may reduce well efficiencies or impact surface water, as we looked at before. DFCs associated with lower pumping, they may extend the groundwater supply and levels to meet future needs. It would minimize or result in less well interference than the other scenario, and could limit groundwater drainage between property owners. So again, there's both sides of this coin, and the extra layer here is that DFCs don't exist in a vacuum. Each of the districts will take these back and incorporate these into district rules, and the manner in which that is done, in my opinion, has a more direct influence on whether private property is impacted or not, more so than the DFCs themselves. We looked at the feasibility of achieving the DFCs. There is the physical feasibility to consider, which is most easily demonstrated using a model run. You know, the question is, can you simultaneously achieve each of the DFCs that have been proposed, and we have clearly demonstrated that by incorporating them into a single model run. There's also the regulatory feasibility, which is, do you have the regulatory authority to achieve the DFCs as stated? And it seems clear that the DFCs being considered in the GMA can be achieved using the existing regulatory tools available to the GCDs. If you had proposed something that was associated with no pumping whatsoever, including pumping that's exempt from regulation by a GCD, that would be an example of something that is not regulatorily feasible. But that's not what's being considered today. And then finally, other factors considered, which this group identified as as faulting as a significant impact here. So there's faulting throughout much of GMA 14. These are not seismic, they're aseismic, so we're not seeing earthquakes from them, but they can be impacted by or accelerated by groundwater pumping and associated subsidence where they exist. I'll add that faulting has more localized impacts than does subsidence, but where it exists, the impacts can be pretty acute. I showed the faults on the previous slide, but there's numerous, these are gravitationally induced, faults that are largely shifting down towards the coast. And there have been recent studies related to faulting. This one is out of SMU using INSAR remotely sensed data. And many of the faults, so this INSAR data is used to look at rates of changes in the land surface over 2 different time periods, and you can see how the rates can be significantly different across fault traces. And so this is one of the ways that both subsidence is being monitored and faulting impacts are being monitored, and within the GMA. So that was I don't know if I'll call it brief, but a rundown of the factors that we've reviewed throughout these past 2 years, how they relate to the joint planning process and the consideration of the DFC scenarios. And I guess I'll open it up to any questions and discussion.
Appreciate it, Wade. Anybody have any questions for him?
No, I just want to again say thanks, Wade. It's a nice slide deck for the layman understanding of what we do, and I will be heavily plagiarizing most of the deck.
That's what it's here for. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Gary said. Wade has a really good summary. Appreciate the effort that went into that.
Thanks, Mike.
Hearing no questions on that particular item, we shall move along to item number 8. Discussion and possible action regarding the DFCs and the path forward for GMA 14 to accomplish statutory mandates for round 3 joint planning. This kind of opens, since we don't have anything specific, we can use it very broadly to discuss anything at this point. Sam has indicated that she and one of her consultants would like to provide us some information, and this would probably be the place to do it at. And somebody help me remember that Ms. Reese had a question, I believe, at the beginning that we should also see about answering here as well. So why don't you kick it off, Sam, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. And I want to echo what Mike and Gary said to Wade. Thank you again. I know it's been a long process, so appreciate it. I know after this, I do look forward to getting to talk with everyone on a little bit more of a casual dialogue about some of how you feel about some of the factors and the potential DFC statements. But before we do, I wanted to clear the record on a few points just to make sure we're all on the same page. The dual metric scenarios or model runs that were introduced by Wade have appeared to cause some confusion amongst the public and perhaps some other GMA 14 representatives. Wade first introduced the dual metric approach at the April 29th GMA meeting, and the runs were ultimately voted on at the following May 29th meeting. As stated by Wade when he introduced these model runs, the runs were to be used as a basis for evaluating the remaining factors because each have some component that will rely on model run results, which is why we need the scenarios to move forward. Specifically, the scenarios were used primarily to evaluate impacts on subsidence, private property rights, and socioeconomic impacts. Wade also specifically stated that selection of the model runs to move forward to evaluate these factors would not marry you to any particular DFC statement at this time, and that the runs were used to study the remaining factors and inform the process of determining the ultimate DFC statement. I, along with James Beach, qualified Lone Star's vote in approval of the model scenarios as a basis to evaluate the remaining factors, but not as ultimate DFC statements. Since May 29th, Lone Star has reiterated that it did not intend to use subsidence as a metric in its actual DFC statement. So consistent with Wade's qualifications regarding approval of the scenarios as a basis to evaluate the remaining factors and not as binding DFC statements, Lone Star supported 2 of the 3 scenarios. At the same meeting, I asked that each scenario be taken up individually, but the motion was made as a package deal. No matter, Lone Star has never been confused about the model run exercise, nor has Lone Star ever changed its position about not wanting a subsidence DFC statement. There have also been questions as to whether myself or the Lone Star consultants have had proper authority to make presentations, decisions, or statements in this process. I can say with 100% certainty that we have had the authority we've needed to engage in the process. As some of you know, I reached out to inquire as to how you have handled the votes and decisions with your boards. What I learned is that my board chose to take preliminary votes on certain matters, though it was not necessarily required to do so. My board then created a DFC committee to which it delegated full authority to navigate the process and bring back a DFC statement for the board to consider. And like you, I was delegated authority to engage in this process as the GMA representative. As we all know, our boards will have the ultimate vote on the DFCs. My board chose to vote on model scenarios to evaluate the remaining factors, even though it was not required to do so. Some of you have obtained or will obtain board approval to vote on proposed DFCs, while others have chosen to provide their board's updates on the DFC process through a GM report. Personally, I'm not questioning your process or authority. In fact, the research has been educational for me as my first time going through this process. And I only bring this up because presentations circulating in Montgomery County suggested that Lone Star, my board, our consultants, or myself had done something wrong, which we have not. We addressed this at our last board meeting, and I wanted to make sure we cleared the record here as well. If the implications against Lone Star were true, it could suggest that other GCDs may have done something wrong as well, and I do not believe that to be the case. Lone Star, including all directors, staff, and consultants, have acted with full authority throughout the process. At this time, and per previous votes on the model scenarios, Lone Star supports the 70% remaining available drawdown scenarios. Using the RUND base file is consistent with the resolution of the DFC petition and the strategic water planning study. My board intends to vote on proposed DFC statements, but has not yet done so. The presentation circulating in Montgomery County, which wrongfully implied that Lone Star changed its story and lacked authority, created confusion and took up much of our last board meeting. We also were able to hear from a number of public commenters. Therefore, at the last meeting, the DFC committee stated that it was not ready to make a recommendation to the board. The board instead requested that I schedule one-on-one meetings with various stakeholders to ensure we have all questions answered before the committee makes a recommendation and the board votes. While my board has not formally voted yet on proposed DFCs, Lone Star cannot support a DFC statement that is not a revision of the DFC and does not address the issues raised in the successful DFC petition. The voting GCDs are required to revise the DFC after a successful petition. The successful petition of the 2016 DFCs means we're still waiting for that DFC to be revised, which was promised to occur in this round. While the 80% remaining available drawdown scenario embraces an actual aquifer condition and common reservoir process, it still is not reasonable with regard to finding the balance between the highest practicable level of production and conservation. The level of production associated with the 2016 DFC was approximately 64,000 acre-feet per year. The level of production associated with the 80% remaining available drawdown is 61,537 acre-feet per year. So the 80% remaining available drawdown DFC is going backwards and not forward in terms of finding the balance of the highest practicable level of production and conservation for Lone Star. As you may recall, Lone Star's management standard from its creation in 2001 and during the last 2 rounds of joint planning was sustainability. This sustainability standard was based on a simple calculation of how much the Gulf Coast Aquifer recharged annually within the district's boundaries, which was determined to be approximately 64,000 acre-feet. That estimate was then set as a pumping cap and de facto MAG in the first round of joint planning. The district then requested in the prior 2 rounds for the voting districts to approve a DFC that yielded an available groundwater number equal to 64,000 acre-feet per year pumping. We understand that GMA did this at Lone Star's request. But as you know, the law has changed and Lone Star's prior DFCs and regulations were challenged successfully because they did not comply with the new standard in Chapter 36 or Texas law. Chapter 36 was modified by the legislature to require the balancing test and changed managed available groundwater to modeled available groundwater. It made it one consideration in permitting decisions. The Texas Supreme Court has also mandated that groundwater regulation must afford every owner of opportunity for a fair share of groundwater production. In response to the changes in the law and the legal challenges, Lone Star commissioned a 3-year water planning study to understand how additional groundwater could be produced without unreasonable impacts. In the strategic water planning study performed by LBG Guyton, Lone Star studied resulting aquifer conditions if additional subsidence was produced. The study specifically evaluated water level declines and subsidence. The study was completed in 2017 and showed that additional groundwater up to 100,000 acre-feet could be produced without unreasonable impacts on subsidence or unreasonable economic impacts. Based on the results of the study and changes in Chapter 36, Lone Star changed its management approach from setting a production cap based on estimated recharge volume to one of reasonable aquifer declines and used Run D from the study to resolve the DFC petition. I provided you with a complete copy of the study addressing additional groundwater production in the GMA 14 Dropbox. I also believe you were provided with a copy after the DFC petition was resolved, and Lone Star requested this group revise its DFCs ASAP. Lone Star's 2016 DFCs were found to be no longer reasonable, and its reduction rules put in place to achieve the DFC were found to be statutorily invalid from their inception. These were serious legal issues for Lone Star that it cannot repeat in this round of planning. Lone Star must have a DFC that is reasonable, a DFC that affords every owner a fair share, and a DFC that represents the balance between the highest practical level of production and conservation. Simply put, Lone Star can no longer justify a DFC based on the recharge estimate because the law has changed and Lone Star got in serious legal trouble for violating the law under its prior DFC and regulation. Lone Star is asking you to help it move forward with the new DFC that represents that balance, complies with the law, and is supported by the best available data and science. I don't think it's any secret that the protestants who successfully challenged the 2016 DFC are waiting for the DFC to be revised and are monitoring this process closely. At least one of the protestants has indicated it will petition the DFCs and include all member districts if the voting GCDs adopt any DFC for Lone Star that deviates from those agreed upon in the resolution of the DFC petition. The same protestant has also indicated that if a direct challenge is ineffective, then it will likely be forced to file suit against the various districts. I've included a copy of this letter that I received in the GMA 14 Dropbox. The 70% remaining available drawdown using the Run D well file is consistent with the resolution of the DFC petition. As you know, we proposed Run D as a standalone, but the group did not approve it. We believe using the scenario with the Rundy well file will address the protestants' concerns. The presentations on water level declines and modeled subsidence we've seen throughout this process were the same or similar information that was considered during the strategic water planning study. Importantly, on the Lone Star board at the time were representatives from SJRA, Woodlands Water, and Conroe, all who have given public comments throughout this process. These stakeholders all approved the study and its conclusions and voted in favor of seeking a DFC that had an associated production of 100,000 acre feet per year as the balance between the highest practical level of production and conservation. The study utilized the Haga model, which was and still is the best available data and science that we have. Lone Star's board at the time all supported the additional production and resulting aquifer conditions, which were found to be reasonable. So the science supporting production of 100,000 acre feet per year in Montgomery County was fully vetted by key stakeholders who had seats on the board and was unanimously approved by Lone Star's board, including those directors who were appointed to represent the interests of the key stakeholders like Conroe, SJRA, and Woodlands Water, again, whom you've heard from throughout this process. It now appears that some of these same stakeholders no longer support the results of the strategic water planning study. This is confusing for Lone Star because their appointed representatives supported it at the time. It's also confusing and appears contradictory that the Woodlands residents and mud boards are advocating for less groundwater production to maintain certain conditions in the woodlands, yet its sole water provider has filed an application to increase its permit. As you know, a GCD does not force any permit holder to produce a certain amount of groundwater or prevent any permit holder from using as much surface water as it chooses. So it appears and is my hope that the Woodlands, SJRA, and Lone Star can work together to address the woodlands concerns. The good news for you is these are local issues that are not a problem for this group to solve. Lone Star plans to address these local concerns through stakeholder meetings and potentially through regulation at the local level if need be. Lone Star respectfully requests that GMA 14 voting members address the bigger planning goals for the entire GMA and let Lone Star handle its local issues. Lone Star has objected to and continues to object to having a subsidence DFC statement for a number of reasons. First, in all three model scenarios, remaining available drawdown was the limiting factor, not subsidence for Lone Star, such that a subsidence DFC metric or statement is not necessary or meaningful for Lone Star. In other words, the models do not predict that either of the 70% remaining available drawdown scenarios would create an average of 1 foot of subsidence in Lone Star's jurisdiction over the planning period. Second, Lone Star objects to a subsidence DFC statement because there are other impacts outside of Lone Star's control. For example, impacts can be felt in Montgomery County from pumping in Harris County, and Lone Star has no control over their pumping. Lone Star has commissioned a subsidence study specific to Montgomery County to ascertain more data on where subsidence may be occurring and what are the causes. Of course, the end goal is to share the results of the study with this group for future planning. Third, there's a question of reasonableness and fairness. I've been asked what is reasonable for impacts on subsidence when trying to find the balance between the highest practical level of production and other factors. Chapter 36 doesn't tell us how to evaluate the impact on subsidence in the 9-factor analysis. But it is instructive to review the data for the subsidence districts to help inform what might be reasonable for a GCD. James will be presenting some maps that will show historically how much subsidence has occurred in previous years, and then more recently from 2000 to 2016. You will see significant occurrences historically, and then you will see leveling off in more recent years as the subsidence districts have worked hard to attempt to end subsidence. Despite their best efforts and hard work, you will still see increases of subsidence still occurring in the boundaries of Harris County over the last 15 plus years. Requiring GCDs to restrict pumping to cause less than an average of 1 foot of subsidence over the next 70 to 80 years when 1 to 2 feet of subsidence has occurred in Harris and Galveston counties over the last 15 to 20 years does not seem reasonable and is not required under the balancing test in Chapter 36. My question is, why would the GCDs put a stricter standard on themselves than even the subsidence districts have accomplished or been able to accomplish historically? The subsidence districts have a statutory mandate to end subsidence, but pumping in Harris County is still causing subsidence. Ultimately, the subsidence districts have been given an opportunity to find out how to meet their demands while also trying to minimize subsidence over a long period of time under their own rules. So you have to ask yourself, how is it fair that a number of GMA 14 GCDs are bordered by them and their groundwater pumping can affect us, yet the subsidence districts do not have an acceptable level of subsidence standard or a max level of subsidence they are allowed to cause? Seems like a stricter standard for the GCDs. So we're requesting that you keep the impact of subsidence in perspective, evaluate it relative to what's happening in neighboring counties and under the balancing tests required for GCDs. Fourth, a metric used in the DFC statement must be measured and monitored. Lone Star does not feel it has the appropriate number of monitoring sites or equipment at this time to provide accurate monitoring for all of the county. The location of our current sites and equipment will not give us a good average. This was similarly echoed in the HART Groundwater Consortium SAC report that was mentioned earlier. Lone Star is in the middle of a subsidence study that will help inform how to expand its subsidence monitoring network. It was a goal of the previous board. It's a goal of the new board. It will happen, but we need to finish the study. There are other GCDs with much less or even no monitoring equipment whatsoever. A GCD should not have DFCs it cannot measure or monitor. Planning and implementation take time. The subsidence districts have been at this since the 70s trying to curb subsidence. According to their regulation, they balance demand, growth, and subsidence. According to their own information, and as an example, the Northwest Houston on the loop has experienced 7 feet of subsidence historically. So it's taken these modeled subsidence districts that we all look to for ending subsidence decades to try to find that balance. Even under the most focused and strictest statutory mandates to end subsidence is still occurring historically for the subsidence districts. To be clear, we don't want to have anywhere near the level of subsidence that's occurred in Harris County, occurring in Montgomery County. And the good news is the model predicts that subsidence won't exceed an average of 1 foot over the planning period based on the projected pumping. GCDs have to balance many other factors that the subsidence districts are not required to take into consideration, which makes this process even more difficult for us. Another thing GCDs must consider are private property rights. The Lone Star Board is focused on fair share across the common reservoirs. It's my understanding that the decreases in groundwater in the subsidence district's regulatory areas are based on a percentage of demand, which can increase. So that does not necessarily mean that less groundwater is being produced in the aggregate. The 2016 combined MAGs for the subsidence district for 2020 is 545,000 acre feet per year, yet some are questioning whether it's appropriate to allow 100,000 acre feet per year to be produced in Montgomery County. Only authorizing a GCD to allow its owners to produce a mere fraction of the amount of pumping that is authorized by a comparable neighboring county raises serious questions regarding private property rights and fair share. The 70% remaining available drawdown using the RUN-D well file still allows for much less pumping than what's occurring in neighboring counties, but it's a good step toward providing fair share across the common reservoir. Lone Star does not object if any other GCD would like to include a subsidence metric in their DFC statement, if, for example, a subsidence is a limiting factor for that GCD. If all GCDs have the same base DFC statement of a remaining available drawdown or blank feet of subsidence language, if subsidence is in fact a limiting factor for them, then we believe that it's still approaching management from a common reservoir basis. This group started with an aquifer condition that can be measured without a model, which is what we were advocating for as the starting place, as opposed to deriving a DFC from a pumping cap or managed available groundwater number. So we believe if everyone has a remaining available drawdown statement and potentially an or blank feet of subsidence statement, then we've made great progress towards managing a common reservoir. We would all have the same core DFC statement modified to add additional metrics for those districts that need or want it. However, even though we have adopted a common reservoir approach, we still have the statutory duty to adopt DFCs that represent a balance between the highest practical level of production and conservation. The 80% model run does not do that because its associated production is less than the production associated with the 2016 DFCs, which were deemed no longer reasonable and successfully petitioned. The other two runs of 70% remaining available drawdown using the 2016 and RUN-D well file generally only affect the pumping distributions in Montgomery County, with the exception of very minor changes in counties bordering Montgomery County. So approving those allows you to have the standard you want while also finding the balance needed in Montgomery County to ensure a reasonable DFC is adopted. Planning in this process is long-term, but the decisions here have real-world implications for Lone Star and local regulation. So what we are doing here does matter, and we need to fulfill our duty to find the balance between the highest practical level of production and conservation. The prior DFCs were based on crude estimates of recharge and did not survive a DFC petition because it did not balance between the highest practical level of production and conservation. So we need to be somewhere in between the two, if you will. And we need your help and support to get there. Otherwise, Lone Star will be back in litigation. And unfortunately, it sounds as if all the other GMA members could be included as well if there is a DFC petition. As I let you all know a few weeks ago, Lone Star is not ready to vote today. The DFC committee and my board want to continue to review model runs, study the 9 factors, and hold stakeholder meetings. This was a long statement, and this process has been long. But I do thank you all so much for the time and effort you've put forth and working with me in this process. I've asked James to show a few technical slides that further illustrate some of the points Lone Star has been making. And we welcome all questions and hope we can still engage in some Q&A and general dialogue on everything that's been presented this round. And I'll turn it over to James.
All right, can y'all hear me okay? Okay, thank you. And I've got a few animations that I've added to the PDF. Is there any way you can give me control?
We aren't able to make you a presenter when you're an attendee, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Well, again, thank you. As Samantha said, we know this is a long process, but it is very important, as was stated in all of her comments. And we appreciate the patience that y'all are exhibiting here to go through this. I always tell districts that I work for that this is one of the most important things they do, and appreciate Wade and everything he's trying to pull together as a consultant, and what all of y'all are doing as making tough decisions and interacting with the board and each other to make some hard decisions. So with that, we'll move through to the next slide, please. So as Samantha stated clearly, LSGCD is not ready to vote today. The DFC committee and the board are still reviewing modeling results and considering the balance of the 9 factors, and is working to communicate with stakeholders. She stated much of this in some of her statements, but we wanted to get it on the record here as well. We don't, the LSGCD does not want a subsidence DFC metric in Montgomery County, but supports the right of each GCD to adopt a subsidence DFC metric as desired, and if you need to. The schedule allows for a vote at a future meeting based on the May deadline. Next slide, please. So, thank you. So here's a slide from the strategic study that Samantha had mentioned that Lone Star spent 3 years completing. And one of the interesting things that came out of that study was this is sort of the starting point for some of the modeling that was done in that study. And what you see there is that total pumping from the Gulf Coast Aquifer in Montgomery County flattens out at 64,000. And again, as Samantha stated, that metric was based on a crude recharge estimate that didn't really consider because it didn't have to. In the early days of the district, the 9 factors were not a part of the consideration. The legislature came to town, changed the law. The managed available groundwater, as Samantha said, turned into modeled available groundwater. There were several legislative sessions. Things changed, and so while this was the starting point for the modeling that was done during that study to see how a correct balance could be struck between private property and subsidence and socioeconomic and all the 9 factors, it was decided with that, and with in the midst of hearing from many stakeholders that this was not appropriate given the new law and the new decisions in the courts, that we needed to consider other things. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see that during that process, the law had changed. There was a new balancing test in place. Samantha's comments had reiterated this. Next slide, there were 9 factors brought in. I won't go through each of these. Wade has covered them very well. But all of this happened since that 64,000 recharge calculation was first done, 20 years ago. And so while some of that 64,000 was sort of historic and put in place with a crude estimate of recharge, it didn't stand up to the new law and the new judicial decisions that had been made and guidance we'd gotten from the courts. And so obviously I'm not a lawyer, but Stacy can talk about all that. And you heard about all of that when we had all of the legal folks come in and talk about private property rights. Next slide, please. So with those changes in the law and changes that Montgomery County and LSGCD had to consider, they ended up sort of with a run D, and it maxed out at 100,000 acre foot per year. We do apologize for any confusion that might have occurred. When we talk about Run D in the strategic planning study, it was clear that the maximum pumping did end up at 100,000 acre feet per year in Lone Star. And so when we say Run D well file in our scenarios that we're considering here, what we mean is the vertical and horizontal distribution of pumping, not the ultimate volume of pumping, which is higher than 100,000 acre foot. So we did want to clarify that and apologize for any miscommunication there. But the idea was, here was the balance, and Samantha talked a lot about this in regards to, you know, all of the stakeholder input, all of the permittees that had weighed in, and all of the different factors that were included. All of the 9 factors were included because they were in place when this study was done and when Run D was developed. And so that's an important historical note with regard to why this is still important to Lone Star to move forward with one of the 70% runs. Next slide, please. So here, what we see from, back to that whole private property issue, and just sort of one way to illustrate how much water is being used on an acre foot or on an acre foot per acre basis. What we see here is the shaded counties and how much water is allocated via pumping or via their mags, historically with the 2016 Dfcs. And what we see is that Montgomery County, of course, is that, if you look on the left slide, 64,000 acre feet, that was that historic mag that was developed. What that equates to is about 0.09 acre foot per acre allocation. And so this gets to the issue of what some people consider private property rights and allocation of available groundwater and fair share. And obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but you've heard about all that from the lawyers that came and visited with us. One of the things that's important about these slides, I think, is that we have big users to the south that have an impact on Montgomery County. And if we look at the acre foot per acre number in Harris County, it's almost 3 times what it is in Montgomery County with the current 2016 mag. In Fort Bend County, it's about double in 2030 with the 2030 mags. And if you go to the right-hand figure, you see that Fort Bend again is more than 3 times what we have in Montgomery County with the 2016 mags, and the Fort Bend, in the Harris County is double. So, and you can see that allocation as that GCDs consider as far as the area allocation. It's just one way of looking at it, and but it is illustrative. And if we move to the next slide, we felt like it was important to kind of consider the 3 scenarios and how those compare. If we look at our scenario with 70% and 1 foot of no more than 1 foot of average subsidence. Okay, or did we skip a slide there, I guess? Okay, so one of the things, I apologize, going back to the slide that was skipped here. So one of the things that's interesting about the process that was followed here in round 3, I applaud y'all for taking the time to do this and for Wade to set it up and for you guys to go through all of those model runs. I do think it's important. If we look at Austin County, the process yielded quite a bit. Wade had alluded to this earlier in his comments that, hey, if we look at that third from the left column, the Gulf Coast aquifer with the 75% available drawdown scenario had a huge increase in the available pumping, given those that DFC. And so, Wade had indicated, hey, because that has an effect on other counties around it, it was decided that we wouldn't allow more than 30,000 acre foot of more than the demand to be pumped from any particular county. And so there was a restriction set on the runs moving forward from this initial scenario. Now, this scenario and the pumping shown here is not even one of the 3 scenarios that we were looking at to move forward with. But one of the things you'll see here is that in some counties, taking this, DFC approach and just setting kind of an aquifer condition as the metric, some counties don't have as big a mag as they did before, and some counties have a much bigger mag. But it was decided that, wow, okay, if we allow, for instance, Austin County to have what this type of DFC metric would allow them, that's going to have too much impact on other counties. Well, it goes the other way too. When there are large pumpers next to you that aren't even in the consideration for a variable pumping, in this case, the one that's important to Montgomery County and Lone Star is Harris County, and so while it's not a variable, it does have a huge impact on us, and we'll step through that and take a look at that. So next slide, please. So once that first 75% scenario was done, then we honed in on 3 scenarios, this being the first one. And the important point, one of the important points here, of course, these are all numbers from Intera's runs, and you can see the mag number. If you look at Montgomery County, you can see the mag number for the most aggressive pumping, we'll say, with the Run D allocation is 115,000 acre feet. That comes out to 0.168 on an acre foot per acre basis. Still smaller than Harris County to the south. Almost about, or a little less than half of, or a little more than half, I'm sorry, of Fort Bend County, less than Waller County still. And so we aren't asking for anything that's that unreasonable, given the fact that we have 9 factors to balance and that we have a growing population, just like a lot of other counties around the Metroplex. And so that's one of the things to point out there, and you can see where your county falls with regard to area allocation and how it compares to other counties. Next slide, please. And all of the next 2 slides are basically just the other scenarios with 70% and 1 foot. And there you can see that we're still significantly less than other counties in the fast growing, highly populated areas with growing demands. And then the final scenario is the 80%. Next slide. And with that, we end up, as was pointed out by Samantha, we end up with actually less water with this scenario than we ended up with the 2016 or the previous 64,000, which was successfully petitioned, and we were told to go back to the drawing board. So that's, while this presentation is a little lengthy, we just want to say this is important to Montgomery County. The feasibility to a degree of that 61,000, that 80% run, has already been sort of thrown out to a degree by the successful petition. And so we're asking you for your help to not do anything unreasonable, but to allow us to make changes, as Samantha said, that will hopefully find a better balance of those 9 factors moving forward. Next slide, please. So one of the things here, we know that the Harris-Galveston, the subsidence districts have done a great job in trying to reduce production and, minimize or stop subsidence. And yet we know it takes a long time. Planning and implementation, changing of water supplies takes a long time. It involves infrastructure, money, changing of rates, water rates, all kinds of things. And so it takes time to implement. And even under very strict statutes and regulatory implementation, what we see with these 2 slides, one on the left, both of these slides are from the district's own work, their contours. You can see on the left-hand side the subsidence, the total subsidence historically. In the western part of Harris County, you see that little circle there at the loop about of 7 foot. If you go to the right-hand side, and I apologize that I can't point to on the screen and help you understand, but if you look at that central western part of Harris County, again, you see that 7 foot contour over this 16-year period has grown substantially. If you look at the western part of Harris County, what you see generally is that there's been another foot of subsidence typically when you look at the change in total subsidence over the 16-year period. If you look at the county boundary between Harris and Waller County, you see that 1 foot contour on the left, the red contour. There's only the 1 foot contour up in Waller County, in 2000. By 2016, the 2 foot contour is over there. And so obviously, we're not saying that it's only Harris County pumping that has these impacts. We know we all affect one another. The same is true up in Montgomery County. We know that pumping in the southern part of Montgomery County affects Harris and vice versa. The point is that planning and implementation take a long time. The Lone Star District is asking you to work with us to continue to make changes that are consistent with Chapter 36 and the law, and to the best we can find the right balance. And we applaud all the work that's being done to monitor and to work to reduce subsidence. It is important to Lone Star, and we work with the subsidence districts to monitor and all of that. And so this is by no means saying there's not a lot of work being done and hard, heavy lifting being done. It's more to say, even under the best of circumstances, with great objectives, we haven't stopped subsidence, and it's a process and it takes time. Next slide, please. One of the things we wanted to do just to kind of give some perspective to historic and predicted subsidence is to kind of compare the historic subsidence. So we've overlaid contours and the predicted future subsidence. So I want to slow down here just a little bit. This is these are complicated figures. I want to make sure that you understand, we're showing those contours in Harris County. Those are old, historic, already occurred subsidence as of 2016. So you can see that same 7 foot contour there in the middle of Harris County. You can see the 1 and 2 foot contours moving up into Montgomery County. A lot of that is from production in Harris County. Some of that's from production in Montgomery County, and vice versa. We all affect each other, we know. And so that's the historic subsidence that has already occurred. And we know that that's still occurring even under the best of management and goal setting. The predicted subsidence that is occurring is the blue shading, which you've seen in Wade's presentation and historically. So what we see is that the future subsidence in Harris County in many areas is predicted to be less than a foot. just like it is in the northern part of Montgomery County and in the counties to the west and away from the Metroplex. So we've got more stable predicted water levels, but then in some cases we don't, up in the southern part of Montgomery County and the western part of Harris County. And so those more stable water levels have allowed the subsidence districts to have a lower predicted water level, a lower predicted subsidence for the future. But it's important to remember that there's been a substantial amount of subsidence already because of the water level declines. Now, Lone Star, as Samantha said very clearly, we're not interested in producing more subsidence for the fun of it. That's not the point. The point is we are charged in Chapter 36 to find the right balance, and in no way are we interested in producing excessive subsidence. In fact, all of these runs, including this most aggressive one from a pumping perspective, show less than 1 foot of subsidence on average in Montgomery County, although it's clear that there are some areas on the southern end that are predicted to have more. Next slide, please. And then here is just the 3 different scenarios for comparison. This is the other 70% remaining drawdown scenario, and then the last one, next slide, is the 80%. So you can see that even again, all 3 of these scenarios for Montgomery County have very little impact on any of the rest of the GCDs. And from a pumping perspective, and they're even with a substantial decrease in pumping from the Run D run to this 80% run, just about half the pumping, we still have 2 to 3 feet of subsidence in that southern part of Lone Star. We're not going to be able to avoid it based on the predictive modeling that's been done, even if we do keep that. And so what we're asking, as Samantha clearly stated, is to work with us to find a reasonable balance and to select a reasonable scenario here. Next slide, please. So just to clarify, some issues on subsidence. Subsidence districts in GMA 14 regulate groundwater withdrawals for the purpose of ending land surface subsidence within their jurisdictions. That's straight from the draft resolution. And they do not have DFCs. Again, that's from the resolution. However, it is clear that pumping in their jurisdiction has caused at least a foot of additional subsidence in some areas, between 2000 and 2016. Lone Star GCD cannot control the portions of subsidence, historic or future, predicted subsidence caused by Harris County pumping. This is evidenced by the fact that the future pumping in Harris County is not a variable, and that's even being considered in the GMA 14 simulations. It's fixed at 228,000 acre feet, and that's done, through the Harris-Galveston Subsidence District Regulatory Plan. Again, we applaud all of that. It's not that we're throwing rocks. What we're saying is that it does have an impact on us, just like that 75% run showed us that even though Waller County, under those DFC conditions, could pump 200,000 acre foot, it was deemed that, we need to reduce that to no more than 30% of the demand, because that just has a big impact on other people around us. The reverse is true too, and that's all we're pointing out. Lone Star GCD is not mandating that groundwater pumping occur in the woodlands, and Samantha said this. I'm just kind of repeating it here, or anywhere else in Montgomery County. Rather, we are working jointly with GMA 14 GCDs to find the balance required by Chapter 36 and to appropriately consider all 9 factors, which is required of Chapter 36 districts. LSGCD supports the right of each GCD to adopt a subsidence metric, even if we are not currently in support of one in Montgomery County at this point. Final slide coming up. Socioeconomics, LSGCD strategic planning study, which is now in the Dropbox, and Samantha mentioned, considered the drawdown and subsidence. It did the same types of runs with Hagam, the best model available, and still is the same model we're using. There was a lot of consensus. Samantha said a lot of this. There was a lot of consensus, and the board vote was unanimous. That was the path taken, seen as a reasonable path forward. Key stakeholder support and issues were fully vetted. LSGCD is not making any permit holder pump groundwater. As Samantha said, they're looking for solutions locally to solve that issue. And socioeconomic impacts brought forward in this round were the same as those covered in the strategic planning study that was mentioned and that you can review. And with that, I'll say thank you. Next slide. I think that's it. Yep. Okay. Thank you. And if you have any questions, Samantha or I can take time to answer if John approves.
Thank you, James. Anybody have questions for Lone Star?
John, this is Gary. Samantha, I got a question. Just your statement, I appreciate your comments you put. It was long, and I definitely agree with you. It does seem like the majority of our effort at the regional planning seems to be your local issues, and I appreciate you recognizing that. I'm a little confused on a statement you said. You said measuring subsidence is not necessary or meaningful, therefore you don't want it in the DFC, but if it's not meaningful or you don't expect to exceed it, what would hurt it being in there? So that we all have the same DFCs. Do you understand my question?
Sorry, technical difficulties. Yeah, no, I do understand. I think that it's more of that metric perspective. As Wade said, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be meaningful. And so I think basically your question, I think the opposite could be true as well. Why have it in there if it's not meaningful?
Because it's a metric that we can scientifically measure easily and accurately.
Okay, so, well, and then that would bring me to a question that I kind of had for everyone else, for all the other GCDs, is how do y'all plan on measuring it?
I can only speak for myself. We have one measuring unit in our district currently, and we're actually planning to add another one in the next year because we think it's easy science. The same reason that I assume Lone Star installed many. You said you have many sites, but you don't have enough. I don't know how many you have. Do you know roughly how many you have currently?
Yeah, we have 14. And it's I don't even know that it's necessarily a number. I have been talking, it's been a while now, but I've talked with Turco, we've talked with, Mike, and we've talked with a number of other entities because it's a goal to expand that network. As I mentioned, it's been a goal of the previous board, it's a goal of the current board. It's the goal of our subsidence study of phase 2 is to expand our monitoring network, because where they're kind of situated right now is it's not, I don't think it provides for an adequate average across the county. I mean, yes, having them is a huge benefit. I don't think that's, anyone's going to deny that. But it was one of the things actually that the HARC report pointed out that I absolutely agree with, is the need for more over a bigger area.
So I'm still sorry, I don't want to hold the meeting up. I apologize to everyone else. I'm still confused. We've been planning of doing this in our DFCs, and I thought we were in lockstep, you as your representative. And now it seems like from your comments, you're not ready to do anything today. You want us to just hold and pause, and then specifically have Wade redo scenarios later for us to all agree on. Is that what I understand from your comments?
No, I don't think that's what we're asking for. I mean, the board has asked me to have stakeholder one-on-one meetings with stakeholders, and so unfortunately we were out for almost an entire week last week, so I was unable. I had planned to have a lot of those last week, and then with this, preparing for this meeting. No, I don't think we're asking him to go back and reconsider. I just think, and again, I don't think we have an issue. I don't think Lone Star would have an issue with anyone else using the subsidence DFC. if they feel like it's warranted in their district. Lone Star does not feel like it's warranted because it's not.
If it was yours, can't we just look at it and see if it's accurate in a few years when we redo DFC? I don't understand why it shouldn't.
That's going to be a board that I'd have to take that back to my board. That's not something that we discussed.
Gary, can I make one quick? Sorry, go ahead.
Anybody?
I think that was James.
Wade, go ahead. I'll give you priority here.
Okay. Very brief comment related to what the limiting factors are, and this goes for everybody. I want to stress that what is a limiting factor in the model run is a model projection or a model result. If one of the features of having multiple DFCs within a county, and I'm not picking on Montgomery County on this. This goes for anyone, is that having multiple DFCs allows you to put the proof in the pudding, as opposed to relying on a model result to say, I'm only concerned with available drawdown, or I'm only concerned with subsidence. If both are the DFC, then you're saying, I'm willing to hold myself to both of these bars. That's it.
Yeah, and what I wanted to say, just I think you asked a great question, Gary, with regard to just to try to bring clarity to what we're asking for. We're not asking for any new model runs. We're asking for the DFC statements to not include a DFC metric, at least for Montgomery County, and that wouldn't take any more model runs. The scenarios that were done, as when we go back, as we tried to clarify, we understood those to be modeling constraints and modeling scenarios, not DFC statements. And we've repeated that. And if it's not clear yet, we apologize. But we feel like there's a big difference from a regulatory standpoint with having that in the DFC statement versus having it as a modeling constraint. And I've been involved around the state with different GCDs and litigation where there have been things put in place as far as standards and rules that weren't measurable or weren't implemented well or weren't even capable of being monitored, and it becomes an issue. And I think that's one of Lone Star's big concerns, is that putting something down that we're not ready to measure today, and we think it could be a concern for the GMA as a whole as well.
So John, if I could just add a couple things.
Please, Mike.
We're still in the interlocal participant part of this, right?
Correct, we are. Number 8.
All right, good. So the monitoring network for subsidence monitoring in the area is extensive in the Harris, Galveston, Fort Bend area, and it gets less extensive as you move away from there. To say that we don't have the ability to measure that right now in Montgomery County is not accurate. Not only are there GPS measurements available, there's INSAR available, there's other measurements available, there's other ways to go about it. In these areas that we've historically seen subsidence, and with changes in water use in some of these areas may see additional subsidence in the future, those are the areas that I think subsidence certainly needs to be in the discussion as these areas relate policy moving forward. This is like the 3rd or 4th time that we've heard Lone Star come forward and blame all their problems on others. And I appreciate the way James tried to walk that line. But the reality is that if you look at the recent data, the issues in Montgomery County recently are Montgomery County's issues. And we can throw up all kinds of modeling predictions all you want. And one of the reasons that we're currently going through our regulatory plan review and updating our population projections and doing all of this work, including updating the model, is because we know there are limitations in it. And we're trying to develop the best possible tools for everyone to better understand the impacts of changes in water use, in particular our groundwater use on subsidence. So we're going through that process, and there's no question, it's a long process. And like James said, developing infrastructure is difficult and it takes time. And we're going through what is the largest water infrastructure project in the country right now in our regulatory area 3 in northern and western Harris County and northern Fort Bend County to facilitate that regulatory plan, which will cut the groundwater use in that area in half. So it takes time. You know, in some areas, Montgomery County already has infrastructure in place. You know, so that's helpful for them, and they have the ability to work through that. But this isn't really a science issue at this stage in the game. I mean, all the information has been put out there. You've heard every scientific side of this. There's no question that subsidence in our area is caused by increased development of groundwater resources. There's evidence all around us. This is a policy and frankly, a political issue at this point. And if we want to make sure that subsidence remains in the conversation moving forward, particularly when there's areas that already have monitoring available that have shown historical subsidence, and we've heard a bunch of public comment that are concerned about this issue, not only the subsidence part of it, but the structural issues with faulting and everything else. Adding that subsidence metric to the DFC doesn't, it keeps that issue on the table so that we can continue to monitor it as a region. We've heard a lot of talk about treating this aquifer unit as a aquifer unit and not breaking it down to the county level, and yet here we are talking about doing one thing's different in one county as opposed to doing it the same all the way across. Harris, Galveston, and Fort Bend County are doing things very specific to our relative mandate and our mission. And we're moving down that road of conversion. By 2035, there's going to be a lot less groundwater utilized in Harris County. And some of the model runs that you saw in here earlier today, they are model runs that look way out in the future. And many of those dark areas that we identified are areas that we're looking at in ways that we can modify our regulations to ensure that that amount of subsidence doesn't occur. And development and all that plays into it. But having the subsidence metric, particularly in the Gulf, in a GMA that's associated with the Gulf Coast aquifer, not only is that reasonable, it just makes too much sense not to be there. Now, the Subsidence District is absolutely willing to work with each of you to help you develop your monitoring network and do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable in how you monitor subsidence. We have a lot of expertise in that regard. We have cooperative agreements with the University of Houston and Southern Methodist University to develop those things with you, and we'd be happy to work with you in that regard. Whether it's the 70% or 80% at this stage in the game, I mean, I think that's right. Those numbers really aren't that much different in the whole scheme of things. But the subsidence metric, I think, was great that you guys added that into this discussion. I think it's something that's been out there for a while and will be worthwhile for all of us to look at over time. Because as James said, things are going to change. I mean, let's assume that let's make an assumption that Southern Montgomery County decides to not do it on their own and go back to groundwater. They begin pumping more, they go back to those rates. At the same time, Northern Harris County is reducing their groundwater use, and they go down to 50% cut at least in some areas, and subsidence rates stop there, but then they start increasing because of work in Montgomery County. So we need to be focused on the broader issue. And the broader issue here is that subsidence is an issue for this region. It's not just a Harris, Galveston, and Fort Bend issue. It's everywhere that we've seen, particularly in the coastal areas, and it's worthwhile for us to include that in our metric.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else have any questions for Lone Star or any comments or suggestions? We are still in number 8. Shortly, we will be considering number 10, which is the possible action to propose a DFC for adoption. If anybody has any other ideas that they want to put on the table, essentially now's the time to do it.
Hey, John, this is Zach. I just wanted to, again, kind of make some general comments that, this entire process and GMA 14 in general has, in my opinion, gotten very bogged down in the weeds of what has been echoed in a lot of statements as way more localized issues, and getting away from the 30, 60,000 foot view of joint planning and making this process way more than what it is. My understanding from the comments, questions, and where we've gotten in approaching this round in response to last round was the fact that, you know, one of the biggest things and biggest complaints about the last round was, you know, the reverse engineering component, which has been echoed and highlighted through Sam's comments, but also not treating, and to Mike's point, treating the aquifer as a unit, as a whole. And that's kind of the whole point of why we went down this multiple metric component, was to identify and treat the entire aquifer unit as one wholesome unit to plan and manage towards. And to the consultants that were presenting and providing comments at the time, our metric system did a better job of identifying and highlighting the constraints and the benefits of our current best available science than their approach at the time. Now, that may have changed with some different scenarios and different work on their end, and that's fine. But the entire purpose of where we are was trying to simplify, you know, keep this process from a planning perspective as simple as possible. The one comment that I will make, you know, towards kind of the Lone Star comments in general is the fact that GMA 14 did not in any way, shape, form, or fashion make the 64,000 acre foot a pumping limit on Montgomery County. Just like if whatever the mag available that comes out of this one is not a pumping cap on any of us. We managed to the DFC, and unfortunately was not a part of the meeting last time, but the monitoring to the DFC, which is what we are charged with doing. There's a reason why, you know, we've gone through the dialogue of modeled versus managed, available groundwater, blah blah blah. You know, let's get back to 2021, even though some of us hate it more than others already. But you know, we've moved past and we're moving forward, and we need to remember to keep it simple and that this is a planning number. And we also can't lose focus on the fact, you know, to Mike's point, you know, the ink isn't even going to dry on this cycle, A, before we're starting the next cycle all over again, and B, and really most importantly, out of starting that next cycle, we're going to have a new model again, which guess what? Means every number that we're approving this time are guaranteed to change. There's a reason why this is a long-term planning window. You know, I greatly respect and admire the kind of the immediate thoughts of needing to have you know, things put in place to measure subsidence. You know, from a broad spectrum where we're seeing subsidence, I believe we have those metrics in place. For those moving forward, we will continue to advance those in the decades to come as it becomes more of a realized issue and trying to set that baseline sooner rather than later. You know, all of that to say is Bluebonnet is wholly supportive of any of the scenarios. You know, but it does need to maintain the multiple metric to cut off the primary and the biggest petition on the DFC part, which was ensuring that we're treating the entire aquifer as a holistic unit and planning and trying to manage it to the best of our abilities in that manner.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. Good comments.
John, may I ask another question? I'm sorry to hold you up.
No, not at all, Gary. Go ahead.
Samantha, knowing that you're here as part of the team for the region, if we decide not to support your ask today, which is remove the multi-metric and potentially delay DFCs further down the road, is your district going to, you know, concede to the majority and support going forward, or do y'all have another alternative not to participate? I'm new. I don't know what happens after this.
I'd have to call on my attorney to answer that. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Stacy's available to speak to that.
Well, just a quick note, if you remember, Gary, I did not vote in favor of, and I technically abstained from voting on the last round of DFCs. They passed 4 0-1, however you want to cut that up. Bluebonnet still adopted them and we went along with them. DFCs, as long as they're passed by the majority, the super majority, they carry, and the district has to adopt them going forward, at least in my understanding of it.
I can say the scary part for Lone Star is, I mean, we're staring down a DFC petition. If y'all take action, you know, that is not something that Lone Star can get behind. And again, with my board not voting, I can't tell you what that is.
What, earlier in your comments, you were talking about voting and the timeline. Do you have any idea when your board would be more comfortable with more studies if you took time to do more studies? Are you talking weeks or months or?
I mean, I would hope within a month we would be able to, you know, get these stakeholder meetings happening. Again, like I mentioned, the goal to do that was last week, and you know, Mother Nature had something else to say about that, unfortunately, you know, and today's Wednesday and I've been preparing for this meeting this week. So we just haven't been able to connect, but I do have, I guess about 6 or 7 that are interested in talking with us, stakeholders.
It seems like it would, from a manager's perspective, it might actually help you if we were able to have a scenario that we chose today so that you could focus studying with that scenario going forward locally, right? Versus not picking anything yet.
Well, I mean, I think as part of the joint planning group, I think it would be a little disappointing to not, if I'm sitting here saying I can't vote, then, you know, for y'all to vote without me.
All right, I'll shut up now.
Zach, this is James. I appreciate your comments about the process being a planning process and long-term. And in general, we agree with that. Lone Star would agree that this is a planning process. It's long-term, it's regional, and then we have local issues to deal with as well. So I appreciate those comments. I think one of the things that's a little different for Lone Star in this time frame is that we just came out of a successful petition. Well, where we were told to change our DFCs. And so while the overall process is long-term and regional, we agree with that. For us on a local level, in a way that doesn't affect anybody else, any of the other member districts, we're asking for help to avoid issues that came up in that last petition. And I think in most GMAs around the state, as we look right now, and in most cases, what you said is exactly right. For Lone Star, in this time and in this place, we don't think it's true. We think that it is very important that even though we'll start this process out as soon as this one finishes, we know that these DFCs and the MAGs determined from them will take 5 to 8 years to find their way into the regional water plan. That affects people that want financing from TWDB. It affects MAGs and what you can consider a strategy, a recommended strategy in the water planning. So while we might say, well, you know, we're going to start this process over again, the regional water planning and all the financing at Water Development Board continues on at its pace. And if we wait another 5 years to change this, then we're looking at 13 years potentially to get new recommended strategies based on that MAG into the state water plan. We've already got folks at Lone Star ask us in Montgomery County. The district is already entertaining calls from entities that go, how do we plan for the future for our infrastructure? How do we invest for the future? And so we agree with you on that whole planning perspective and the way you stated it. Unfortunately, it's not that way for us right now in this case. I think that's exactly right in most cases around the state, and in the GMAs I'm working in and for the entities I'm working with, I think that's generally true. But there are cases where it's not, and it does have impact, and we're just asking for help to try to get over some of those hurdles and get some new things in place.
And I know Stacy wanted to talk a little bit about the petition process, but I wanted to thank Mike for his comments on subsidence. I think we all agree that subsidence is something that we need to be looking at, that we need to be concerned with. but Lone Star can say without a doubt, we can't force people onto surface water, and we can't force people to use groundwater. We're hoping, I am very much hoping, that I get to work with these stakeholders and come to some sort of an agreement, an understanding on how we can all work together on this and find some sort of common ground. But we've tried that. It did not work out well for us. And I'm trying to avoid that happening again. And I don't know if Stacy's available to speak to kind of Gary's question about the petition process and what happens if, you know, if y'all move forward and what Lone Star's options are.
And while we're getting her back on, I mean, I know that you're talking about, you know, continuing to try to work with stakeholders and everything else, but in your statement, you did allude to the fact that, you know, Run D is kind of the best available workable solution between everybody. So if we move forward with that, as, you know, again, the fear of petition, welcome to GMA 14. I don't think we're ever going to ever have another process until, or if the state chooses to do away with the meaningless petition process in the grand scheme of things, when we're on this constant never-ending cycle that has been, you know, echoed and voiced countless times by every attorney that we've ever utilized, worked with, or worked on, or commented in this process. So, I mean, I guess my question, you know, with your statement and basically that the Run D is the point there, with the, you know, with the understanding of you know, the work that Bluebonnet did trying to decompress and try to figure out what Run D actually meant to the rest of us, which I'm used to our stuff being glossed over and ignored, which I'm fine with at this point. So I just don't care anymore. But, you know, we, you know, Run D was great for Montgomery County, but for a lot of the statements that you made of, you know, kind of pointing the finger at others as being the cause, I can now point the same finger at y'all because y'all are getting more pumping and I'm quote unquote not getting any of it from the run standpoint, from a DFC or MAG or whatever metric you want to do. Again, I'm past this point. I'm doing my best to stay out of the weeds and keep this on a 60,000 foot view cycle here. But I guess from James's comments, is the help that you're wanting just the removal of the subsidence from any recognition of Montgomery County, even though in my opinion that would be taking you right back to the issues of 2016? As far as a DFC statement, or are you just asking for more time to be able to have the continued stakeholder meetings that Sam is talking about, or all the above?
Sorry, was that to, I guess, go ahead. Sorry, James. Wasn't sure who was that was directed at.
Yeah, so I think there's multiple levels there, and Samantha, Stacy, y'all jump in too. But I think the Lone Star Board wants the chance to finish the process at home in their district and do their stakeholder outreach and have those meetings that Samantha alluded to earlier in her comments. And then I think we've made it clear, or trying to make it clear, that you know, we need one of the 70% runs. We prefer the Run D. And we're also saying that I think Samantha has said pretty clearly that the board is firmly against having a DFC metric in the DFC statement. And I don't know the order of priority on all those things, but those are the things we're looking for.
Yeah, and he made a subsidence metric. Zach, I do have a quick question for you. You mentioned, and I know is your district interested in more pumping and having more groundwater available to pump and a higher drawdown availability?
I'm fine with whatever the DFC is. It's not going to change anything fundamentally on the way that we permit. We're going to continue to evaluate and ensure that we're not actively creating additional impacts, whether that's a drawdown, subsidence, spring flow. We review and consider it all on a case-by-case basis. We've just completed a rules revision, adding language about, the management approach of management zones, of being able to kind of help push back in areas that are more susceptible than others. Again, if you remember from the 2010 DFCs, we have subsidence identified in both, or meaningful subsidence in both Waller and Austin counties of 4.75 maximum allowable in Waller and 2 point something in Austin. Active potential subsidence that, again, the whole reason why we identified the 1 foot of subsidence as part of the metric is it's part of the reliability of the model. That if it's the modeled subsidence of 1 foot, could mean you're actually not seeing any, but it also could mean that you're going to see 2 feet of subsidence. That's the wiggle room within the model. So it's we're fine as long as we're looking at a holistic approach across the entire county. What we've seen so far with the overall drawdowns and the overall impacts is completely and totally manageable and workable.
Okay, I think we have discussed this back and forth over and over more than.
John, I think Stacy was raising her hand.
With something pertinent, I hope.
I don't know, Mr. Martin. I think I get a right to speak if my representative is called on me. Are you requesting that I not speak?
No, I didn't say that, ma'am.
Great.
But what would you like to speak about?
I'm about to say thank you for letting me speak. It was asked about whether, there's been a lot of talk about the petition and what were the issues in the petition for the 2016 DFC. Mm-hmm. There were really 2 issues. It was the process in which the DFC was developed, and then as one main issue, which I think y'all have addressed in this round by coming up with an aquifer condition first and working around that. The second issue in the 2016 DFC petition was whether or not the DFC was actually reasonable and represented a balance between the highest practical level of production and the other factors. Looking at the 80% run, that will still not achieve that. So yes, you've embraced a process by starting with an aquifer condition, and we greatly appreciate that. But there's still more work to be done in terms of making sure that Lone Star's DFC is reasonable to actually resolve the DFC petition. And while you guys think that this is planning, and I appreciate, Zach's comments about this is just meaningless, as an attorney, I don't think it's meaningless. I think the DFC is the #1 most important thing for the owners of the groundwater, and for the direction to the district on how to manage and regulate. And that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of these people's property rights that you are regulating and managing. So all of the protestants strongly disagree with the fact that this is meaningless, and they are still waiting for the DFC to be revised. With regard to the multiple metric approach, I heard some statements that we were in lockstep with this. Lone Star objected to having a subsidence DFC statement from the beginning and always qualified the study of the scenarios with that condition on it. And I don't ever remember there being a discussion by this group for Wade to run multiple metric scenarios. We went from the runs the 70% run that Mr. Martin, you asked for, and there was one that Brazoria had asked for, and there's one that Lone Star asked for. And then at the next meeting, all of a sudden we had these multiple metric scenarios that Mr. Oliver presented, and it was never discussed at this meeting. So we were very surprised that this was introduced. We didn't object to using it as a basis to study, but we're confused as to how Wade arrived at his decision to present those and who directed him to do that, because it was never discussed or voted on or approved by this group, the voting GCD members who are actually bound by this. And then, just in response to Mr. Turco's comments about, we're all in this together, I agree with that, and you guys are doing joint planning, but it can't be ignored that the subsidence districts set their own regulatory standards, and they don't have an actual acceptable level of subsidence that they are working to achieve. yet they're advocating as the largest user in the region for everyone else as a GCT to be bound by something that they themselves are not willing to do or do not currently have in their plan. So those are my comments. As far as the petition goes, yes, it has to work through the process. If y'all vote today or at a future date and Lone Star doesn't approve it and Sam gets outvoted, we're going to take it back to the district level, get comments and bring them all back to you and work through the process. And a GCD has an ability to petition its own DFCs if it so chooses to. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any for me. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. With regards to your comments about how we came across the multiple metrics, I think it was in April, Wade came to us with the concept, very specifically with the concept, and then we developed 3 models thereafter and very specifically took action to approve those models. Am I not correct? Anybody else back me up there? I think it was April.
I remember him presenting them at the meeting. I just don't remember anybody asking him to do that from the previous meeting. We went from the 75 runs to then them being presented at the next meeting. And when you look at the meeting minutes, I didn't see any discussion about, hey, Mr. Oliver, go do a multiple metric run doing remaining available drawdown and subsidence. We were always starting with remaining available drawdown. Then at the next meeting, Mr. Oliver shows up with those. And I'm not criticizing that. I think it was an excellent exercise. And again, Lone Star was willing to participate in that exercise for the purposes of studying the impacts on subsidence. And that was the basis for doing so. I'm just bringing that up as a point because this group keeps continuing to say that we were all in lockstep and we all are bound by these and this is what we agreed to. And Lone Star clearly objected when they were first presented. And its objections are noted in the video recordings and the meeting minutes.
So I'm on the call. Can I step in here on how that came to be? John?
Sure, Wade, go ahead.
Please, thanks.
So no one directed me to do that. We at the earlier stages of this process, we had lots of discussion related to how there are different limiting factors throughout different parts of the GMA, and so I created that and offered it to the GMA in that April meeting as an option that for consideration that perhaps addresses some of the the differences that exist across the GMA. One of the features of having this process out in the in public meetings and out in the open, and we're all having these discussions, is that I'm a consultant to the GMA, and I can bring things forward, or I brought this forward for consideration and discussion. It was not someone who asked me to do that.
Thank you, Wade.
Oh, and I put up the flow chart. I don't know if everyone's seeing it. For the process for adopting and developing desired future conditions, and the step that we could potentially be at today based on the agenda is proposing DFC for adoption. So to use the same language as before, even proposing a DFC adoption is not marrying yourself to it, because it goes back to each of the individual districts for a public comment period, and then the districts compile the relevant comments, bring it back to the GMA, and potentially there is the potential to change the DFC at that point based on public comments at the GCD level before the GMA finally adopts DFCs.
Wade, this is James. While you have your mic on, I had a question, kind of a technical question. One of the things that was brought up earlier was that the process was carried through to have a consistent DFC across the whole GMA, and that if we opted out of a DFC metric, if Lone Star opted out of a DFC metric in their district, that would upset that whole process. Can we go back to the concept of limiting on that 75% run that I pointed out earlier, and I think you had alluded to earlier? We discovered that in some counties, that 75% metric basically allowed a substantial increase in production over the demands. And so there was a a decision made at some point, well, then we don't want that because it has too much impact on surrounding areas, and so we're going to limit it to no more than 30,000 acre-foot above the demand. Was that the first step in kind of getting away from this purely, aquifer, wide metric? Because we did that at least in one county, didn't we?
Well, I want to make a distinction here. Yes, there are counties, I don't have them all committed to memory, but there are counties where the mag in the model run, excuse me, the pumping in the model run bumps up against the 30,000 acre foot limit before either the 70% or 80% or the 1 foot of subsidence limit. But the reason for the inclusion of the 30,000 acre foot into the model run was in order to keep the simulation rooted closer to reality. Having Austin County pumping 300,000 acre feet per year doesn't seem as rooted in reality as what's currently in the run. Now, if I would separate that 30,000 acre foot tie-in to projected demands as not part of the DFC, but as a modeling assumption. The reason that that's important is that if someone comes into Austin County, well, let me back up for a second. The reason it's important is because, as has been said before, the districts here are all tasked with managing to the DFC and not to the main. And so if someone comes into Austin County and has a need for pumping, that need should be evaluated against its impact on the DFC, a percent available drawdown remaining and the additional subsidence, not on its whether it's within that 30,000 acre feet of projected demand. Okay, there's no reason to forecast that is likely to occur. That's why it's included in the simulation. So for those that in the model run, the pumping hits the 30,000 acre foot limit, it is possible that there could be more pumping if significant additional demand materializes in those areas.
And you would agree that if there was a request for 30,000 acre foot in Waller County, and we had shifted from 200,000 acre foot availability from the pure DFC of 75%, I'm going back to that first run, then certainly the drawdowns and the DFCs projected from an additional 30,000 versus an additional 200,000 would be less, would be less, right? And so that would affect that permitting decision potentially, or am I missing something?
Well, perhaps I'm missing something. I'm not sure the tie-in to the 75% simulation. Drawdowns can cross county lines, and the amount of drawdown that there is tied to how much pumping there is. I don't know that it's more complicated than that. Perhaps you can restate your question if we're not addressing it.
Well, I think there was a couple of issues. Number one, that policy decision that says we don't, and I agree, it's a policy decision from my vantage point, and it flowed into the modeling without without a whole lot of maybe thought on future. I'm not accusing anybody of any lack of thought process. I'm just saying that was our first change to the purely aquifer state of 75% remaining drawdown and 1 foot of subsidence. And so I guess what I'm getting at in one way is there seems to be a lot of concern that Lone Star doesn't want a DFC metric in its DFC statement. We were fine with the way that the modeling has occurred. We just didn't want the metric in the statement. And so it appears as though a lot of people think that's the first time that anybody's veered off of this approach. But really, we had a veer and a policy decision to veer off of a pure 75% DFC or 80 or 70 long ago. Back when we said, well, if the demand isn't that, then we won't let it go above 30,000. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think what you just said was your interpretation of multiple metrics. So I'm not sure whether I can agree with your interpretation of multiple metrics. I think that yeah, I don't know what else to say on that.
So to be clear, I'm not even let's not even talk about multiple metrics. And I apologize if this seems mundane to most people listening, but I think it's important. I'm not even discussing the multiple metrics. What I'm saying is, if the process was important, our decision about, by the way, the modeling does include multiple metrics. Our DFC statement is what we're asking not to include multiple metrics. We're going, according to the modeling, Lone Star is going to adhere to both metrics. We don't feel like that the monitoring is sufficient at this point to get a good average, and for other reasons we have issues with this. But my main point is that this isn't the first change that we've made to this process and this approach to assessing the DFC. We made the first change long ago when we said, well, that's just too much pumping to put in those counties because it has too much effect on other counties around it. And that's just not reasonable. So there was a policy decision built into the modeling at that point. And my only point is our minor change to not include, even though the metric is included in our modeling run, we just don't want it in the DFC statement. This isn't the first time we've done this in the process. Okay. I think that's my point. I don't know if I'm clear yet or not, and I will.
I think we're very clear, very, very clear. Lone Star does not want a subsidence metric in the DFC statement. Correct? No matter what.
Correct.
No way you guys will be happy with that. No way. I think we all understand that. I think it's a solid middle ground, however. So personally for our district, moving forward, including a subsidence metric with the 70% drawdown, or one of the other models is a decent middle ground. But that being said, I think we understand where Lone Star is coming from. I think we understand that they're not happy with how things with the models are playing out. But you guys have not brought anything else to the table. You have not brought a single other thing. You brought Run D to us, took it away, brought it to us again, pulled it away. I don't know what you guys are asking for because you've never specifically brought anything to us. I think it's time to move on, however. So that being said, agenda item number 9, GMA 14 Interlocal Agreement Financial Report.
Hey, John. Hey, John, this is Zach. Could I request or ask for a 10 to 15 minute break so I can make lunch right quick for a little one that's probably going to be a little bit perturbed if it's not ready in about 10 to 15 minutes?
No way we can say no for that. What time is it? It is 11:40. How about make it back, round it up to noon?
Works for me. Much appreciated.
Okay, doke. See you on about 20 minutes.
Who was the woman that bragged about not being recognized? Speak. I heard these things that one. That's like out on campus.
So what's for lunch, Zach?
Bean and cheese quesadilla with a side of avocado and orange.
I'll take 2.
I'll start making and send them your way, assuming he leaves any left over. Appreciate the brief recess.
I can't tell what.
I'm back.
We're just missing Pudge. All right, one, two, get the subsidence districts. Don't want to forget you guys again. Gary, Zach, Sam, Beverly. Is Pudge still on? Connected. Pudge is still connected.
Hey, John, the interlocals, we're going to be done after this next agenda item, right?
If you have any update on the financial report, that's where we're at. And then, yes, then we're done with the interlocal.
I'll give one when I get that started, but I think Robert had mentioned to me that he may have to step out around noon because we've got a board meeting in Richmond.
I've got a few minutes left, so.
Okay, good.
Oh, if you're ready to fire it back up. Are we up and running again?
Dr. Peterson, are we good to go?
We are good to go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Time is it is we are back in action at 12:02. We are on agenda item number 9, GMA 14 Interlocal Agreement Financial Report. Any update there, Mike?
I have no update. Things are moving along just as we expected. I'll get because of the winter storm last month, I don't have that form for you guys today, but I'll get it out to you and you can put it in the Dropbox, but there's nothing of consequence to discuss at this point.
Okay. Moving on then, that finishes up our joint planning interlocal agreement participant portion of the meeting, and we will reconvene as the GMA 14 district representatives. And item number 10, this is a discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve for adoption DFCs for the relevant aquifers within GMA 14. Steel.
Hey, John.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to, I've been sitting here on this break thinking a little bit. And I would like to respectfully disagree with your last comments that Lone Star has not brought anything to the table.
Okay.
I think we clearly did in February and April. And I'd also like to address comments that were made regarding Lone Star pointing the finger. I need to tell y'all, that's never been the intention. The intention was that, and my hope is that y'all would understand where we were coming from and the position we were in, and think about putting yourselves in our shoes and helping us out, especially when there's minimal impacts to most of y'all. So.
Can I ask what you think you'll bring back to the table in 1 month time if we were to give you the break?
I'm sorry?
What could we expect if we were to take this extra month and give you guys some extra time? What could we expect? What are you hoping to get out of this and bring back to us?
I'm hoping to get my board members of my board sitting down with stakeholders and discussing, working together to figure something out, and then direction from my board on how I can vote.
Okay.
That's my goal.
Okay. Well, we are at item number 10, and that is an option if somebody wants to make that motion. And we can get a second.
I would recommend giving them another month.
We got a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second, John. But I would like to ask a question of Samantha.
Sure.
Samantha, would I assume that you would agree that we have been cooperating with almost everything you guys have asked for, right?
I absolutely think that you guys have given us the opportunity and the time and the energy.
Okay.
But I do hope that it's clear that it's not finger pointing. That's not the goal.
Okay.
At all, from my perspective. That's not my intent. I don't
Sure.
believe that's my board's intent. But we do have to explain our situation because it is different.
Yeah.
We've never been in this position before.
I definitely admire and wouldn't want to be in your shoes, so to speak. You guys have had some unusual circumstances, so.
I
We are.
appreciate that. I wouldn't want any of y'all to go through this either.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Anybody opposed to giving Lone Star an additional month? Hearing no nays, I'm going to say that motion is approved unanimously.
I greatly appreciate it.
Moving along to item number 11, discussion of possible action regarding the next meeting date, location, and agenda. Well, I know, I guess May 1, right, is the cutoff. I would like to have a little spare time, so maybe you can shoot for March 24, or exactly 1 month from today. How's that look for everybody?
I think since we have the 5th week option, that may alleviate some of the potential time constraints on our lovely hosts, if I remember right.
So, Mike, does the 31st work better for you guys?
Yes.
You're muted. You're muted, Mike.
Hey, Mike, you're muted.
Just kidding. I want to make sure you guys are paying attention. Now, the 24th at 9 a.m. we can do. The 31st is also a fifth Wednesday, and we can do that as well. So whatever works best for you guys is fine with us.
I have no preference personally. Does anybody have a preference? Seems like they all work for everybody.
Yeah, 31st would be ideal, just to, again, allow for additional time for stakeholders meetings, but we could do either. I could make either work.
Gary's good with the 31st.
We're good with the 31st.
31st it is then. 9 o'clock start or 10 o'clock start?
I would prefer 9.
Beverly, you said 9?
Oh, that would be my preference.
9 o'clock it is.
Not start.
9 o'clock, March 31. Everybody good with that?
Yes, sir.
We're rocking and rolling. Item number 12, meeting adjourned. Appreciate it, guys.
As I say, one request I would make, since again, there will obviously, or I assume there will be agenda item recommendations either from Lone Star or others that will likely need to be reviewed as soon as that's even in a draft form, that the rest of us can see it, so that we're not just having another meeting on the 31st to then have to rehab another hearing in 2 weeks and springing everything on everybody else. Again, we are at the deadline. So
Absolutely.
if anything that can be shared, even, we understand that it's in draft. If y'all can't make a decision by that point, that's fine too. But the sooner that the rest of us can be able to lay eyes and review it and understand what it means to us, the better the next meeting will hopefully go.
Agree.
Appreciate it, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.